Welcome to Brand Enabled with me, Gabriel Cohen.
And with me, Holly Osborne.
This is where we talk with brand leaders willing to share the real-world lessons from being in the trenches.
Their triumphs and setbacks in the messy business of building brands.
These are the human stories behind branding that you will never find in any brief or case study. Holly, today we're talking about one of my favorite subjects, which is learning and the discipline of learning and creating a brand and a person who is working for an organization that is transforming learning.
Right? Thank God. We need that. This is Ayo Seligman, and Ayo is one of the most interesting individuals I have ever partnered with in my career. Ayo is now the vice president of brand and strategy as well as design at Minerva Project, which is a revolution in the education space, as you said. And thinking back to my history with Ayo, we go back to days together at Landor. We were absolutely joined at the hip.
And he was a creative.
Years.
He was a creative
at Landor. He was a creative. But what's so interesting is that his entire focus was strategic to the point where the clients actually referred to him as both their strategist and their creative, which was really beautiful. And it set the stage for what Ayo went on to do after Landor, which is this, as you said, transformation within the education space. So Ayo is now the VP of design and strategy at Minerva Project. We're going to learn all about it from him in a few minutes. But what is so cool about this guy, and why I'm not surprised that Ayo went to a company that was revolutionizing anything, whether it be education or household goods, is that Ayo is one of the few people in business who truly drops his ego the entire way through a conversation. And he leads with a really an affirmative way of developing ideas and brainstorming, and he feeds off you and he lets you kind of feed off his ideas, and that exchange is super exciting because his ego doesn't get in the way. So it doesn't surprise me that a company that was trying to completely carve out a new space pulled in someone like him, who's a really open thinker, who leaves room for other people's ideas. So anyway, I just can't wait to hear what he has to say. It's going to be a good conversation.
Yeah,
so
I can't wait. I couldn't believe I'd never heard of this institution. They are an institution that's being used by some of the Ivy Leagues to help transform how they're thinking about learning and higher education. It may not be the tier one brand that everyone's heard of, but my goodness, it's been amazing to learn about what they're doing, because the future for all of us, for us, for our kids, it is about learning and changing the approach to learning that has been done the same way for 150 years. So let's bring in Ayo.
And I want our listeners, by the way, to pay attention, because this brand will be tier one. So you will have gotten in on a conversation while it is burgeoning, while it is growing, and it is so exciting. I'm crackling with excitement around this. So, all right, enough for me. Let's get into it.
Last little teaser. A lot of the things that we see in Teams or Zoom today, the little functions like emojis and
chatting, the sidebar chat.
Minerva invented that. Minerva invented that
way before the pandemic. They were doing pandemic style communication years and years before it was forced upon us. So This is going to be a cool conversation. Here we go.
All right. Welcome, Ayo. We're absolutely delighted to have you on today. It's even more special to have someone who's a friend and former colleagues of Holly as well. You guys worked together in the late 2000s. Was that right?
We worked somewhere in there. It's all a blur, but it was definitely, it was the 2004 to 12, something. Yeah. We had a good run, but I'm so excited to have you on today, Ayo, because not only are you my favorite work partner of my entire career.
Heart emoji.
Back at you. We actually Gabe, we sort of shared a brain, or like we shared a brain space. Like our brains were kind of like incubating and sloshing around in the same marinade for a while. And I think Ayo introduced me to a concept of, I mean, he spoiled me. So, when I left Landor, I was expecting to just always have IOs. And that is unfortunately not the case. What he does is fairly unique in the sense that the strategy and the design pieces of his thinking and that brilliance are completely interwoven in my experience. And there isn't a beginning, middle, and an end for Ayo in the process. And I think that was what was so exhilarating about being buddies and partners at Landor, was that we had this kind of force multiplication together when we brainstorm. And that was because Ayo was equally steeped in design thought as he was in brand strategy. So I'm rambling on. The most important thing is to get Ayo talking here. So I want to pass the baton over to him, but I'd love you to actually, before we get to all the exciting conversation around Minerva and everything that you're doing in your career today, I want to go back down memory lane a little bit. No, not to us getting drunk at SeaTac Airport 600 times, but actually to getting back in your head. Back then, there were silos. There was strategy, there was design, there was account management. How did you decide that you could major in both? How did you decide you could be dexterous like that? And how was that received at the time?
Yeah, that's a good. There was also verbal branding was another of those silos.
Exactly right.
I'm not sure that I even decided. I think I just gave myself permission without asking anybody, and I probably didn't do that consciously. It's just sort of how my brain works, I guess, which can be a positive, but it can also be, I think, to your question, it can also be perceived as a negative, right? Because you're often stepping on toes, or at least seen to be stepping on toes, infringing on others' territory. But the best collaborations, like the one that we had for such a good long stretch, the idea of those boundaries was less clear, and it wasn't territorial in that way. And there were other colleagues at Landor that I think thought in that way as well. And those interactions and relationships created the best work, I think, consistently.
I was going to say, newsflash, those silos still exist.
Spoiler alert.
Most agency, yeah, spoiler alert, and not just in branding, but any agency you can think of, and it's a broader reflection, I think, of not our industry, but you look at many client side teams, right? Especially if you now client side, which is this notion of thinking about job roles and descriptions as being so fixed. And I think one of the things that we've really mind melded on is this notion that the future really belongs to the generalist and the creative generalist. But the notion of working in an interdisciplinary way. These all sound great in theory, but because you work for an educational institution, what's the actual benefit of that? And B, how do you create an environment that allows that to work?
Yeah. Okay. That's a multi-layered question. Let me actually go back quickly and just say that I think those silos which exist throughout the business world, as you said, Gabriel, are a result of the educational system, which in turn is a result of the Industrial Revolution and the Enlightenment, more or less. So you had this approach to learning that was based around disciplines, right? So we're going to train people to be business people, we're going to train people to be psychologists, et cetera, and it's gotten more and more specialized over the years. I think more recently we're starting to see that some of those boundaries break down at more progressive institutions, but there are still a lot of those silos in the education world as well. So, sorry, getting back to your question about what are the benefits of interdisciplinarity in the educational space, I think they're the benefits that are also true in the branding space, and they're also true more broadly, which is that instead of that kind of fixed, non-collaborative way of working, being interdisciplinary allows you to, I guess, commune with other minds, as Holly was talking about, right? That sort of sharing the same
kind of hive mentality.
Yeah. And making connections that aren't, especially in the creative world, that aren't obvious or self-evident.
Ayo, because one thing I want to pick on is when you got to Minerva, you had the opportunity to, and correct me if I'm wrong, but to craft that job a little bit, because as the vice president of strategy and design, you are tasked with straddling, right? You are responsible for both. Was that your idea? Did you convince Minerva that they needed someone who could look after both, or did they know that? And how did you frame up the job? Like, what did you tell them you were going to do in your first 100 days, for example?
Yeah, that's a super good question. I think it happened probably more organically than not, but and by that I mean the institution was a startup, so it was everybody wearing lots of hats, and there wasn't budget to build out a massive creative or strategy team. They knew that they were going to need kind of a heavy focus on brand, and so they wanted to build a team that was nimble, I guess, in that way.
So I was going to say, Holly, let's talk about Minerva then for a second, because
exactly what I was thinking.
Let's
dig into that.
It's a cliche that we often talk about in branding, which is, it's the best kept secret in the world. But I was absolutely, I use an old English word here, flabbergasted when I learned more about Minerva, because it really is the most innovative university in the world. And we'll talk about the Minerva University to then Minerva Project, but give people who were like me a few weeks ago that had never heard of Minerva University a background of what it is, how it came to be, its role in the world, and then maybe parlay that to then why the Minerva Project now exists.
Yeah, okay. Well, the Minerva Project was the initial entity, if you will, but the goal was to build a new university using first principles thinking. So to look at every aspect of an institution and look at not let's reinvent everything, but let's imagine what if everything were reinvented, and keep the things that are valuable and good, but do away with the things that are harmful or negative. So for example, Minerva University doesn't have organized sports or a college team, if you will, because that's a huge source of both kind of intellectual friction or whatnot. I guess conflict of interest is the term I'm looking for, with the academic programming and the resources that go into athletics at many of the big schools. Another example was none of the professors would have tenure because that focuses them on research instead of teaching.
And on then being lazy once they've got the tenure. Sorry, Dad. My dad's a tenured professor at IU, so
To be fair,
except you.
To be fair to some of the tenured professors, they may not be lazy on their research, but they certainly sort of at least tend to forget about the core of the undergraduate goals, which is teaching undergraduate learners. Anyway, so
sorry,
those.
I was saying, if anyone who is a tenured professor or is listening to tenured professor, I do not think you're late. Please don't start sending me hate mail. I retract my comment.
Yeah, lots of good.
It's about the incentive. It's more about it's the structure and the built-in incentives in there that tenure creates.
That's right. Anyway, so the idea was to look at that and to use the research from learning science to inform the pedagogical and assessment approaches, as well as the construction of a new curriculum that would be skills focused as opposed to information dissemination or content focused, which is what the entire educational space is built around.
Many of us have been to college or got kids going to college. Compare and contrast the learning experience at a traditional, even Ivy League college compared to then how Minerva University does it.
Sure. Well, I'll start with actually kind of a brand focused answer, where we identified kind of early on what the key tip of spear message was going to be, and that was about this concept of the global rotation. So students, instead of going to a kind of protected campus environment, would travel during their 4 years to 7 different world cities, starting in San Francisco and moving through Asia and Europe and.
Very different to just the typical study abroad, right?
Yeah,
I want to go back and redo undergrad. Yeah. I mean, this is okay. Keep going. That's very
so that was the thing that got everyone sort of got everyone's attention. But what we found actually is that the students that were well suited for the institution heard that and said, "Cool," but then they started digging into what the educational model was that made it so different, which was the curriculum and pedagogical practices and all of that I just kind of mentioned. So the other aspect I think that is at Minerva University that is super different is that all of the classes take place online and have been taking place online from the very beginning. So students live together, travel together, and then join classes that are virtual, but they're all synchronous. So we learned in the world of work with the pandemic that you can actually do this collaborative thing with video chat and whatnot, was something that we kind of had realized about 10 years prior.
I was going to say, you were already there well before the pandemic forced us into this. Did the pandemic change anything for your business then? In terms of people flooding in and giving it a chance who might not have otherwise considered you? Or what did the pandemic do to you guys, for good or for worse?
Yeah, that's another really good question. I think before I answer that, I have to kind of explain the difference between Minerva Project and Minerva University.
Yes, please.
So, as I mentioned, Minerva University was this flagship institution that the corporation that I work for built, and the corporation that I work for is called Minerva Project. So what we did was build this institution as a proof of concept, and what we've been doing since is consulting with other institutions around the world to help them innovate using all or many aspects of the model that we developed at Minerva University. And then so getting to the pandemic question, it actually, contrary to what everybody would assumed during that time, ended up being harmful. because where before we had a specialized technology that was designed specifically for educational purposes, but it had aspects that lower cost and more accessible technologies like Zoom and Google Meet and the rest have in common. Multi-stream video, and some of them actually copied from the Minerva platform, which is called Forum. Things like emojis and sidebar chats and things like that that we had implemented very early on. So anyway, all of a sudden we had a whole host of technology competitors where before we didn't have any, and or at least we had very few.
Minerva Project is also a technology company, so it's not only a guide and a consulting sort of support arm, like a transformational partner for universities, but also they may just tap into your tech. Was that part of the business? Okay,
that's exactly right. So the value proposition is that the technology enables the model.
Okay,
and so we have to help universities adopt the model, which involves training. It involves re-architecting their curriculum, et cetera. And then it involves licensing the platform for them to be able to collect the data, manage all of the new curriculum, and specifically maintain and aggregate the skills assessments that are at the core of the learning experience.
Okay, so that is so interesting. So we have almost a model that has multiple facets to it. It isn't just education. But I'm curious if we back up a little bit. So we're starting to get a picture of the Minerva Project's mission. When you walk in there as VP of Strategy and Design,
I came in as creative director. So
as creative, okay. Yeah. Forgive me. You earned that VP title, bitch. Okay, so when you walked in there, what was your mission that was linked to their mission? What did you want to get done for the brand at that point?
Yeah. That was what was most exciting for me was coming in to a startup institution with aspirations to take on the Ivy League. So how do you build an educational brand in, call it a couple of years, with the kind of level of awareness and prestige, and of course it's still getting there in terms of awareness, as Gabriel mentioned, it's the best kept secret. But for those that know, it does measure up in terms of prestige. With those Ivy League institutions, how do you do that in a couple of years against institutions that have had 200 years to build?
Essentially, you're not trying to break into the education. I'd argue you're not trying to break into the education sector. Even when you were starting Minerva University, you were actually trying to break into a luxury category. Because
that was exactly how I thought about it. Yeah, it was okay. Like that, because you're exactly right, Gabriel. That Harvard, Yale, Stanford are
luxury goods. They're not educational establishment. Yeah. The luxury goods who build their brands on creating, and it's not just because of the obscene price that you pay, but because they're actually built, Holly, on building scarcity. Yeah. They pride themselves on our acceptance rates, and even the public university. So even when you think about the University of California system, 30 years ago UCLA had an acceptance rate of 65-70%, and now it's like at 6 or 7%.
Gabe set the stage that this is a luxury category. You're breaking in. Are you the biggest disruptor to ever walk into this category? Or were there any also rans before you?
No, I think most of the other entrants, the kind of one that we looked at closely, but that wasn't anywhere in kind of the same disruptive league, if you will, was Olin, which was focused on engineering. They were using some really interesting curricular and pedagogical models, kind of focused a lot on design thinking and some of those aspects, but it was not as comprehensive, and they were kind of playing in the same ballpark, if you will, as other institutions. So no, I don't think that we had a parallel to look at. So when I was thinking about the brand, I was looking at luxury goods. I was looking at hospitality experiences. Part of that was the global rotation piece of it, and that kind of thinking really informed the student experience in a way that I think made it pretty magical for them.
How did you begin to even capture that through? So as the brand leader, because first you've got to educate, ironically, or coincidentally, what have you, because there's first mover as a disruptor also carries the burden. The onus is on you to also kind of educate, like A, this is a thing, and B, it's a good thing because it's this and this. So yeah, and I'm hearing, I want to go back to and be sensitive to the fact that this was not a resources rich environment, perhaps, right? Like it was a startup.
It was a startup.
Maybe that's an unfair supposition. Maybe you were rolling in it. But I'm wondering how you mapped out a plan for brand and such a big takeover with such a huge category. With did you have the resources, and what was your plan in for those who are listening, even if they're at a big, well-established brand, even if they, are not having to educate their audience, there's always a challenger aspect, right? We always want to throw elbows just a little bit, and so I'd be curious what we can pull from your playbook around, all right, I only had so many resources to go around. This is where I began.
Yeah. Every story needs a villain. I think, a couple things. One, we weren't resource poor, but we were taking on a massive undertaking, right? It wasn't just let's do this one thing. It was let's do a technology build, let's build an entire faculty. Let's establish 7 global locations in under 4 years.
Yeah, just like some curriculum while you're at it, just like casual.
Let's completely reinvent the curriculum and retrain all of these instructors that have spent their lives lecturing in an active learning approach. So it's not that we didn't have resources, but it's that brand and marketing and the outreach team for student acquisition were only a sixth of the, or even a seventh of the whole undertaking. And a typical startup is like, well, let's build the tech, or let's figure out this one audience that we're serving. I think the good news for us was that there was already a desire on many students' parts to do something that wasn't the typical college experience. I think, as good strategists do, we started from our own first principles and defined, well, what is the mission, what is the vision, what are the values, translated those into a set of guiding principles that ended up being really persistent for the institution and helped tie together all 7 of those kind of crazy aspects. Oh, I forgot to mention that we were also unaccredited and incubating within another institution, so there were all kinds of other politics at play and whatnot. So we also had to achieve accreditation. All that's to say that the brand had to kind of stretch to all of these different parts and make sense for a former professor of philosophy who was coming in now to teach an interdisciplinary program, as well as an African recruitment lead, as well as a student life specialist or mental health specialist. So we really had to do the job of kind of communicating what the ethos was and what the brand meant. I think in a way that with more focused organizations, it's maybe a little easier.
Go back to the students for a second, because you're going after the top of the top, right?
Yeah.
And so it's the same talent that the Stanfords and the Ivy Leagues are going after. And I try and imagine not just the kids, but convincing that conversation with the parents. Say, well, I could go to an Ivy League school that pretty much guarantees me I'm set for life, right? I've got a platform brand. Again, I've got this luxury good now on my resume the rest of my life, not to mention the current network, the alumni network, this huge endowment fund and everything else that comes with it. I'm going to leave all of that behind and go to a pretty much kind of very little herd of university that's creating a better experience. What was the segmentation or the common denominators of those students or families that allow them to take that kind of life risk and go so much against the grain?
Yeah, well, I mean, you're pointing to a couple of things that one of which Holly mentioned, the word challenger. These were all students that were seeking some kind of a different kind of challenge. And the other thing was, one of our guiding principles was unconventional, right? So we were looking for people both to hire, right? So the team that we were building was unconventional thinkers, and we were looking for students that were also coming with an unconventional mindset and wanted to do something different than their peers, wanted to do something different than maybe their parents. And for the first couple of classes, when the students got together, it was remarkable, because these were literally a global population. So I think there were only, in the first couple of classes, only like 15% U.S. The rest was from ex-U.S. And they would get together and they were like, "Oh my God, these are my people." And it wasn't because they were all math geeks, or they were all science geeks, or they were all into English lit or whatever. It was because they all had this like really kind of different way of seeing the world, their own place in it, and kind of wanting to challenge the status quo.
Was there anything risky in your mind about owning that message or that narrative that you are not the status quo? Like, was there any pressure that you felt ever as a brand strategist or within the company to use a playbook or use any part of a very approved and successful playbook that exists in terms of how to go after students, or did you know that you could put yourself out on a limb and say, this is totally different? We are selling a completely different experience. Was your strength in that difference, or was there any fear around that risk of identifying yourselves as wholly different from the average experience or the average?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, we definitely struggled with some of that. I mean, Gabriel, you mentioned the parents. Convincing the parents. I mean, we actually did have to host dinners and sort of help them understand that we got your kids. We're not gonna let them fall apart or bring them to Seoul and let them starve on the street or whatever.
Yeah, but then they're asking questions. Okay, so is my kid gonna? That's the question, right? Are they gonna get a good job coming out of the? Are they gonna get the opportunities coming out? So then I think about those relationships that you then need with the employers, and to have them come and recruit. lot of it comes down to that. It's something we hadn't talked about, right? The employer recruiter audience.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's interesting as well. I think for many of the students, that kind of unconventional thinking also comes with entrepreneurial thinking. So many of them, especially the early ones, were kind of budding entrepreneurs. But getting back to your question, Holly, the difference there from a branding perspective was nothing but thrilling, right? I mean, that's what you always want is differentiation, and it was like overt. It was like there's no hiding it.
But don't forget what Walter Landor says from the grave about over-rotating on differentiation and losing relevance. Remember relevant differentiation, or have you had to bury that in years of post-Landor therapy?
No. I think about it all the time.
Of course.
All the time.
Yeah. So that's the tension I'm curious about, is how far could you go with, selling the sort of uniqueness of this experience? Or was, how did you find that tipping point where it was like, if we go any further and kind of we look any more contrarian, to Gabe's point, the parents are going to be like, yeah, hang on, this doesn't feel
I think
safe.
The main thing that for parents and students that anchored the relevance was the skills focus, right? Was this idea that the world is changing. We don't know what the jobs are going to be that you're going to actually be pursuing. So it's foolhardy to train for a job that's not going to exist. And I think we're seeing that, in real time playing out now, right? With AI, it's going to be all kinds of that disruption in categories that may have seemed secure 5 years ago.
Yeah, that's fair.
So yeah, I think that because they were super bright, because they were unconventional, they recognized already that skills, not information that was free on the internet already, was going to be the key to their success.
So you establish Minerva University is now established, and then, and I know you said you started with Minerva Project, but then your role at least then moves kind of full time into focusing on Minerva Project, which kind of feels like it sits at the intersection of being an ingredient brand and a movement brand, because now your audience are other educational institutions who are realizing that the world is changing, that they need to think different about learning and experience, and want to bring some of this combination of the curriculum, right, the licensing, the technology, and consulting. And we're talking about Yale and other Ivy League schools and schools in Asia and in South America. Now your audience is it's like the dean of these colleges. I guess first, is that characterization of ingredient and movement brand accurate? Is that how you see it?
Yeah, I couldn't have put it better. I think that's dead on, and it's challenging, right? I mean, it's challenging to build a movement and kind of maintain a movement brand, and B, the idea of being an ingredient is also a little bit anathema to wanting to also be the kind of foremost educational innovator in the world, right? So, like, how do you kind of balance that? I mean, we talk about Intel a fair bit, and how that kind of inside.
It's NVIDIA now. It's moved on now. Yeah, NVIDIA is the new ingredient brand.
Right. Exactly. But they don't have a cute jingle, at least not that I'm aware of.
Right.
But yeah, so and also helping our partners see the value in the ingredient, because many of them, the Yales of the world, especially, don't necessarily see that. They've got the brand thing covered.
They want you to white label.
Right.
Because they don't want your borrowed equity. They want to bring everything for themselves. Whereas maybe is that differ then? I imagine different parts of the world that's different.
It is, yeah, it is. But it's also different based on the kind of perceived prestige of whatever institution we're interacting with, which relates to their global ranking or their U.S. News and World Report's ranking, and that's sort of such a flawed metric, if you will, but it is the one that gets used.
So how do you position the brand then, given that the core audience is different, but you still kind of want to reach, I suppose, great pull through the end users, the students in believing that education is transforming, and when you think about transformation and innovation, you want to think about us. How do you then go about positioning and creating that distinction with the Minerva Project brand compared to Minerva University?
Yeah, I think from Minerva Project, we actually don't really concern ourselves that much with the students.
Okay.
So it is more a B2B.
Truly is B2B. Okay.
A B2B play. Although there is some visibility of the brand in the student experience, it's not the focus of our brand positioning. What we are focused on is actually what Holly articulated before. This kind of services plus platform that enable innovation.
So you're in this tech company that's in academia, or you're in academia building a tech company, and how versed were they in the notions around brand, in the principles around brand? I can't imagine, and someone can correct me here, that academics think a lot about brand, and then technology companies, when they're first growing, certainly brand is on the mind, but it is not necessarily where they are pouring all of their intelligence and all of their research, right? And their resources. How did you prioritize brand? And in fact, once I think when you first got to Minerva, you and I chatted, and you said that someone told you like brand was a dirty word or something. I was like, oh, get out, Ayo, get out. Those are the wrong people. But truly, how did you put brand front and center? How did you enable that discipline to grow and to build a team around that? And did you find you had to do a lot of education within your own ranks?
I certainly had to do a lot of education, but I cannot take credit for the kind of embedded ethos of the need for and power of brand. Our founder, Ben Nelson, recognized at some point while he was doing his fundraising and pitching the idea for Minerva, that it was like Gabriel mentioned, it was a luxury good. It was a brand play, and that at the end of the day, the most valuable thing that would be built would be the brand. Yes, technology. Yes, IP. In all of these other things that were being reconceived, but it was a brand play from the very beginning, and that was another thing that attracted me. So it was like I had this founder who was an incredible educational visionary, but he also understood that brand was the most important thing. And then his first hire, the woman that hired me, Robin Goldberg, also recognized the power of brand and was versed in it. So I think the three of us created a strong enough triad that we were able to make brand not so much a dirty word, Although we did still use lots of euphemisms like reputation and prestige.
Reputation is, I rely on that. I think the R word is very important. Did it feel really different to you from being in an agency?
Oh, 100%.
And did you ever miss the agency kind of jam, or did you feel like you found your place?
Oh, 100% on both. Yes, it was very different. You as in the agency context, you're always trying to please the client, but at the end of the day, you go back to your office, they go back to theirs, and the contract ends, and you can move on with your life, client, right?
Yeah.
Here, it was like this never-ending. I want to please. It took me like years to figure out. Oh, wait a sec. I actually I need to take a vacation and please myself once in a while. So that was one I think major difference. I worked my arse off. Missing the branding jam. I think recently with the consulting work I'm doing. I've gotten a taste of that again, but for sure that variety that you get, which again comes from the onto the next. I started to miss that. Although I will say that because of the size and scale of the undertaking, I never really had a dull moment.
I was going to say you could, yeah.
Minerva, but it was definitely lots of different kinds of. I guess stretches for me that didn't exist in the agency world.
I want to ask a question about because you were talking about how much the founder, how much of a brand advocate he is, and I wondered if there was anything around the connection story to the name, because I was doing a bit of background, right? So Minerva is the Roman goddess of wisdom, war, and the arts associated with strategy and learning. And your logo is a circle with 3 folded segments. So you're both a circle brand, which has this connotation of unity, wholeness, safety, and community, and a triangle, which communicates strength, balance, process, dynamism. What statement do you think you were making about the future of education by invoking Minerva's name, and what do you think you're suggesting about the need for role or the role of wisdom and strategy in the future of learning?
Well, the Minerva mission is critical wisdom for the sake of the world. That's how we ended up kind of articulating it.
So wisdom for the sake of the world.
Yeah,
it's beautiful.
I agree. I think that's beautiful.
Thank you.
There's actually a give back part of it inherent in it is very special. So it's not just for self edification and to follow your path and reach your success and achieve money and stability and all those things. It's actually about society at large. That's pretty wonderful.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, I think that kind of ethos was another thing that attracted me to the company. But invoking the Roman goddess, I know that Ben Nelson had a number of things in mind with that. One was the Roman Republic and kind of some of the structural things that existed there and that informed the Enlightenment. And the sake of the world part actually relates to the original purpose of the liberal arts, which was informed citizenry. So all of that, I think, was really attractive. You talked about the logo. That was one of those things. That was easily the most difficult identity design I have ever undertaken.
Even harder than when you and I tried to brand something called ISIS. Which is another story for another time, folks.
Separate episode.
We're still in recovery.
Separate episode. Yeah.
Talk more about that.
Well, the founder has this grand vision. The founder understands the importance of brand. The founder, we had already defined our essence as achieving extraordinary, right? So let's swing for the fences, folks. So what logo is going to be good enough? He wanted it to last for centuries.
So why did this one work? Or if you want to talk about what was maybe more interesting, what was the process to get to this one? What does that the PowerPoints with 100 pages of the discarded ones that were part of the process of getting here?
It was thousands of discarded ones. But oddly, the core of the idea, which is kind of related to the things you just mentioned in terms of the symbolism, happened really early. So we were looking at the competitive space, and everybody had shields, and so I was like, well, okay, if we're unconventional, what's the unshield? Well, maybe the shield is the negative space, and so that was what spawned the basic form. But then the question was, okay, well, how do we make it, super special, ownable, timeless, all of these things? And so that was what spawned the multi thousands of iterations process. What we ended up getting to, which I think was just such a phenomenal solution. It actually was kind of collaborative as well. I was talking to all of the founding team, just like, what ideas do you have? What ideas do you have? I'm like running out of stuff because I've gone through, what if we do this? What if we do that? And the founder had said, look, it can't be too perfect. It's got to have some kind of imperfection to it. And so I was just racking my brain. Okay, what's imperfect but also perfect, and what might actually kind of balance this idea of kind of pure form. We had also, one of the things that that initial mark or graphic idea led to was the idea of a Mobius strip, and the whole team really liked that idea of like kind of continuous change, but it's all the same side, or and there's this kind of mathematical possibility to it that was really kind of felt really right for the brand. But then how do you kind of make that imperfect, and how do you make this kind of pure scientific idea or mathematical idea imperfect? And so I started playing with, as one often does, the Illustrator paintbrush tool, and kind of was like, oh, that's interesting. What if? So what we ended up doing was finding a master Japanese calligrapher, and again, multi rounds of iteration here, and I think she was ready to fire us by the end, because I was like, well, what if could we just, and the calligraphic approach in Japanese tradition is one motion, right? Like it's and so I was asking her to do something that kind of broke with her tradition in order to achieve this perfect imperfect form. Finally, we got to it. But yeah, that's it, right? So
how did you know you were done?
When?
Well, how did you know you were done?
That's a good question. I can't actually remember how
when it got approved.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there was no sort of like moment where it was like, okay, signature on the proof.
Do you have a name for the imperfections that's in the mark? Again, it almost looks like it's a. This might be heresy, I can cut this out if I say it wrong. Almost like scuff marks.
No, we never gave those a name. No, it was just sort of this kind of painterly approach to a kind of mathematical form. That's scuff marks. There we go.
At least he didn't say skid marks. To bring us back to our...
Thanks, Holly.
Yeah, well, we were talking about South Park when this conversation started.
True.
So, I was back in a body of a 7-year-old boy.
So, when we think about what's happening in the world right now, there's been this movement where for years every organization was a tech company, and then every organization was a health care company. When we think about the transformation that's happening, other companies that are going to succeed need to now think of themselves as a learning company. I think about Satya Nadella at Microsoft and the cultural change they've gone through. A big part of that was this philosophy, this idea of shifting from a know-it-all company to a learn-it-all company. It's really, really kind of stuck with me, and I see such a kind of connection between that idea and what Minerva Project represents as an ethos, and not just for your brand, but as something that we all need to be thinking about, and what all organizations need to think about in order to succeed in this evolution from, I guess, creating experiences to the transformation economy.
Yeah. I mean, I think so. I think one of the things that resonated for me early on at Minerva, and I think I mentioned it a little bit earlier, but I'll repeat it, this idea that you have to unlearn behaviors in order to actually learn again. And so there's this kind of process of unlearning. And I think AI is going to accelerate that as one example, but I think we've got other forces at play that are also asking us to unlearn some of the ways that we've done things. I mean, climate is another one, but these big, almost like tectonic trend lines that are asking us to unlearn in order to relearn. But I think, we've got to be as a society, and therefore as companies within a society, adaptive in that way, in the way that learning asks us to be.
I wonder if there's to carry Gabe's thought forward, because I think that's an interesting notion, and I've noticed that some of the most dynamic and interesting brands right now are the ones that are teaching about their product, and I would put the cosmetics industry right at the front of that. That they've realized that they have to have education and connection with women. You cannot just sell mascara. You can't just throw products at women. But I'm wondering now if there's something that Minerva could do to not only bring educational models to institutions focused on education, but can you bring learning models to companies like Revlon, or to companies like Mercedes, or to companies like Hilton Hotels, and say, we want to teach you how to make learners out of either your own staff. I want lifelong learning mindset here, growth mindset here among my staff, and or potentially the customer base at large.
How do you sell it? I love that. How do you sell a learning experience, not just an experience, but a learning experience as part of your brand?
Yeah, and Airbnb is another example that did that. It wasn't just about, rent this gorgeous house. It was about come here and become a local. We're going to teach you about this area. They had all these add-on services. So yeah, Ayo, could you see Minerva or another company coming along and teaching other companies how to teach?
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, it's interesting you say that. Some of our first partnerships were actually with corporations. We were doing some work with LG, another Landor brand, early on, and we got, I guess, not distracted, but we got a lot more focused on higher ed, and I think maybe for better or for worse. But it was there is definitely interest, and I think a need, certainly for the kind of upskilling of employees. I mean, that's maybe goes without saying. That's something that I think all major companies have embraced. But I really like this idea of brand-focused organizations orienting around learning and kind of how teaching and learning can be a part of the story, a part of the promise. That's a really interesting idea. I don't think it's probably Minerva's future, but
no,
I can definitely imagine.
I think it's bigger than. I think it might be bigger than that.
Yeah.
Ayo and Holly, I'm wondering if in some ways this speaks more personally to set a vision for the future of brand teams. Right, Holly, we often talk to Ayo and lots of other brand leaders, and we think about how do you ensure that you as a the traditional, might think as a corporate brand team, stay relevant. Okay, now you have to get more into demand and be more connected to P&L. You can't just sit at the corporate top. That's been one of the tracks and the connection of brand advertising. But I'm wondering if you take it the other way, and when you think about the cross-disciplinary skills that most brand leaders have, how one of the shared skill sets is this notion of being able to see everything from across the organization.
Yes.
The ability to build relations, understand the connection between brand culture and experience. That I wonder if the future of brand teams is to be able to drive, because they're uniquely positioned, to drive a learning environment inside their organization.
It's so exciting when you think about it, because one of the biggest issues that I have as an in-house brand strategist versus when I'm an agency is that we get in our own way because we don't understand each other. Sales cannot understand why they need to partner with marketing unless we educate them better about it. Marketing is never going to express product to its full potential if we can't fully sit with product and fully understand and be educated in a way. I watched deck after deck after deck trying to learn about products at Sienna. Now, granted, it was wave division multiplexing, so it wasn't exactly like learning about, strawberry ice cream versus Rocky Road. But, I think that learning gap was felt across marketing. We were desperate to try to understand better what we were marketing. And, I think even at other companies like Unilever that has a bigger world agenda, they're trying to make a better world in many regions. Like, what could they be teaching each other? So there's so many areas I could see it applied to in-house and bettering teams, as well as bringing your product into new markets, maybe growing markets.
Yeah. I mean, what you're saying, what you just said actually around deck after deck after deck, just keyed something for me, which is that we've all learned how to teach from a flawed instructional model. And so
yes,
if we're trying to educate one another and we're doing it with this based on this thing that's doesn't work, of course it's not going to work, right? Of course we're going to continue to have.
Are you saying the hour-long webinar on where you take people through the brand guidelines and how to use the system doesn't work? And that we're just robots because all we're doing is regurgitating, and that we could actually do something about it?
I mean, guys, we're going to need
Shocker.
another hour for that. I feel like the conversation just started. Like this is like a whole new thing we need to unpack.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm game.
It's but it's inspiring, and I think that we need to peek inside worlds like Minerva more, and not just talk to the big obvious brands because of things like this. What can we learn, and how can we actually take some of this into our own organizations and actually benefit, from what you've done?
Yeah, I mean, but I mean, you're just making me think about this. Like the idea of reshaping the educational model, the learning model, maybe kind of the cultural model inside organizations based on the learning science that Minerva has applied.
Yes.
Would probably have this just transformative effect on collaboration and teamwork and productivity and performance. Like it would be earth shattering for the organization that adopted it.
Yeah, learning and training inside big companies is so ineffective and painful. Even in a company like Google, when I first got to Google, we sat through probably 2 to 3 weeks of education, right? That you're not going to touch anything, especially I was in large customer sales as a marketing liaison into agencies. And you're not meant to talk about anything until you've gone through all of this education. I could no more tell you the difference between AdWords Extra versus AdWords Pulse versus, I mean, you just get absolutely bogged down. And I was taught not to learn, but to absorb so that I could pass a test. That was exactly my education system summed up, right? I was not interested in learning. I was interested in getting A's.
Yeah.
And there was a specific way,
paradigm.
right? And we absolutely studied for tests. I didn't study to enrich myself, and I wish I could go back and do it again. I studied so that I could pass that test with flying colors. And I think we are, to your point, that's brilliant what you just said about we're just bogged down in the same learning models, and we're expecting thousands of employees to watch these videos and go forth and prosper.
Right. So what are some practical, like, from 2 ways in which you can apply some quick principles? Because Holly, what you were saying really started to think about that, because I'm starting to get the idea that, make things more hands-on, like do a simulation, right? You're not going to then all of a sudden do an ad campaign, but Google probably would have the resources to say, all right, you learn a little bit. Now, what you're actually going to do over the next couple of days is you're going to do an AdWords campaign.
Yes,
so you take a simulated client, and here's the thing, and it kind of narrows in what you can actually do, so that
the term from the learning science is deliberate spaced practice.
Deliberate spaced practice. What is what is that?
I'm writing this down.
You get introduced to a concept, AdWords, and then you take that.
Let's use a brand example, like I don't know, some aspect of.
Let's take like
verbal
Adobe
voice. No, like applying the brand voice. That's something that every agency does, and it sits in a PowerPoint, and no one ever knows how to use it.
Right. That's a
good example.
That's a good example. Yeah. Okay. So let's say an aspect of the voice is being provocative. Okay. So how do you make sure that people write in a provocative way? Okay. Well, first let's define what we mean by provocative. So that's introducing the concept, and then you say, okay, Holly, now I want you to write a sentence that maybe is taking an existing sentence, and this often happens in the agency do this for the partner already, and for the client already. And
I bet the client learns a lot from the agency doing that for the client.
Doing it for them, right? Exactly. Right, but you have the before and after, right? So, but instead of the agency doing the before and after, oops, sorry about that loud noise. Instead of the agency doing the before and after, the client does it. So and then the agency says, great. You might want to tweak this here, or kind of adjust this there. Maybe a little too provocative, Holly, with the skid marks. I don't know. And then you go back and maybe talk as a group. Okay, so Holly did it really well. Gabriel mentioned this thing, and both of those were kind of nice examples. But there are these things we could all work on. Okay, we're going to move on to the next attribute, and that's going to be whatever.
Authentic or
human.
which is one of the worst.
Everybody's authentic.
Authentic and human.
And bold.
Approachable.
Yeah. Okay, so the next one's authentic.
That's too naughty, as no one uses that one.
And then next week we're going to go back to provocative, and we're gonna try that again. And maybe
you've done it. Why would you go back to it?
Right, because that's the space. That's the spacing.
I have heard about this. Yes, that it's because it's a method of studying now where the students are encouraged to go back to chapter 1 as they advance, then go back to chapter 2. Now you're in chapter 7, you're going back to 3, 4, 5. You continuously bring the whole thing along with you, whereas we used to just abandon that knowledge as soon as we got through that test, right?
Right.
So that's called spacing?
That's the spaced practice part. The deliberate part is like, let's focus on this thing. But what you do then the second time is not just go back to provocative, but you do it provocative and authentic. So it layers the complexity as you go forward.
Then what? Then what do you do? Like, what's the next step?
Then you've got it.
Then you're a genius.
No, I mean then you kind of you keep building, right? You keep building. You keep scaffolding the learning. Is again another kind of learning world term.
I think we might have to do a separate episode where this voice example is like a tease, and maybe we take different aspects of things that we do in business regularly and try to rethink, okay, how might we reapproach these things through some of these
learning science,
principles of learning. And if anyone who's listening to this has any ideas that you want us to rethink, things that you think that we need to unlearn just because they don't really work, drop us a note and we'll do a follow-up with Ayo. I mean, I start to think about workshops and presentations and I don't know, all types of different things. We can talk about other disciplines. Again, things that we do in our day-to-day in business, or things that and some things that are specific to brand itself.
I think it's a conversation worth continuing. Ayo, this has been so great. Thank you. We appreciate you so much and all your wisdom. You are the right person to work there because I can attest to your wisdom, and it's just really a treat to learn from you today.
That is it for today's show. We started this podcast because we know that you are not alone in the challenges that you face, and the likelihood is that somebody somewhere has dealt with the same obstacles you're facing and might have even found a way to solve for it. For that reason, we've also created a community of brand leads who meet on a regular basis to share and learn from each other. So if you'd like to join that community or are interested in learning more, or if there is a brand challenge you'd like us to cover in one of our future episodes, please do get in touch with us at gabriel@brandenabled.co. That's gabriel@brandenabled.co. If you like today's episode, please share it with your colleagues and friends and subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you for joining us and see you next time.